So, hey guys, you're very welcome to our Engage People videocast. So, our purpose, I guess, as a team is to align business with talent, primarily in the financial sectors, the areas we focus in Ireland. So, I guess part of my day today, I'm very lucky. I get to speak to lots of great people, lots of very interesting people in some of Ireland's best companies. So, thought it might be an opportunity maybe to bring some of these conversations to life. So. Delighted to be joined today in our virtual room by Rob MacTighearnain. So Rob's the finance director with leading global payments company EML. So I'll brief introduce you, Rob, and you can hopefully I get this right. So Rob's obviously training KPMG, spent his first 4 years PQE, so his post qualification experience on the transaction services side. At that point, Rob joined a rapidly growing Irish tech firm as CFO. And then in 2018, Rob joined EML, which is the current employer. And I guess, look, Rob, it's fair to say you've during that period of time now, it's been very exciting progress. I know you're a regular keynote speaker in the fintech space, and you enjoy speaking at various finance leadership events. So we'll get into all of that. But first of all, we're obviously recording this in the middle of April. I don't think either of us have sat in office for the last, or a proper office for the last 3 or 4 weeks. So how's
Yeah,
life at your end?
it's very different to say the least. It's been something that nobody saw coming. I think working from home is a totally different environment in terms of how accessible you are compared to what was previously, where you could walk out the door and, in one way you left the office behind, whereas today it's simply in the room next door always. So it's a totally different work environment, and I think it's been an adjustment for all of us in the last couple
And
of weeks.
how, so you're obviously like buying smack in the middle of the payment space, and we were just having a quick chat beforehand. So I guess on one hand, and people might have a perception that maybe, there's plenty of shopping going on. Amazon seem to be busy on that front, but then obviously on the retail side, it's quiet. So what's been the sort of short-term impact, from your perspective?
So we'd be quite a large white label player in the retail kind of
Hmm.
gifting space. Would be the largest actually globally, and certainly in Europe. And we've been tracking the performance of our retail partners over the last couple of weeks. And to say that it's been shocking would be an understatement. We all know it, we all hear it in the media, but when you see it in the data that you have, it's quite a scary thing. We've seen the shutdown, start in Italy and Spain, and progressively move northwards throughout our kind of customer portfolio. The only kind of bright light, I guess, from a business perspective has been how Sweden has kind of stayed open, and we have some green shoots there. But to date, I suppose our business has ground to a halt, because other
Yeah,
businesses
fair
have
enough.
ground to a halt
And
as well.
and personally, how are you adjusting to it? So I think you were saying because your role involves quite a bit of travel, so you're generally set up to work remotely now. But how are you adjusting personally to the day-to-day side?
Okay, I
Hmm.
suppose like all of us, I'm incredibly frustrated to
Hmm.
just be stuck indoors. But I'm getting great bonding time with my dog, um, and adapting to playing kind of quizzes through WhatsApp and stuff. So it's amazing how novel
Yeah,
we can be
yeah.
when we're
Any
forced to be.
particular is it general knowledge or sports or what's the?
It was we played the other night, and there was, I think, 20 or 30 people playing across seven or
Brilliant.
eight teams on a WhatsApp group. It was good crack, but I'm
Right.
pretty
Okay.
certain
Fair
I
enough.
came near the bottom.
So just in relation to companies, right? So you've obviously worked in, obviously we spoke about KPMG. You'd have worked in a sort of a small to medium-sized Irish business. You're working with another, I guess a fairly significant player. I mean, how are you finding, say, productivity, morale, and achieving that sort of effective communication? Obviously there's lots of stuff around, social media in terms of the focus in on that. I guess every company is doing it differently, and a lot of people are sort of feeling their way around at the moment. What's been your approach so far, and what's been working for you? Maybe what's been the challenge?
Yeah, I think I think everyone's going through a huge change. I suppose for us in our business in Europe, we've been relatively fortunate about, the structure that we had originally was we're spread across, five or six different offices in Europe, so we're quite used to having video conferencing being part of meetings, but never used to having everyone in a meeting on VC. So that's been a bit of a change. I think, the way we've adapted to it pretty quick is FaceTime is
Yeah.
the only way you can move forward. Telephone is effectively dead now at this stage, and you get that face to face time which you're used to in an office, and now you just get it through VC, and that makes that kind of connection far more effective, and it also helps with productivity and morale, which is hard in these times when you're when
Mm.
you're by yourself a lot, really. So we're doing regular stand-ups, daily, weekly ones, formal and informal ones. I think the informal ones are as important, if not more important, because it's stressful when you're alone, and that connection is so important, and the ability to just have a laugh with your
Yeah.
colleagues that you would have had in the office. That we try and somehow replicate that online. So we have weekly EMEA catch-ups. We also have regular finance ones, and that just gives the ability for people to connect and you know
Mm.
share a joke, I guess, and have a laugh, and just
And
be
on the, say on the
themselves.
finance side, then, without getting too much into the sort of the specific task, but just from a systems perspective, is it fair to say a lot of systems are cloud based now, whereby there was an adjustment that maybe 5 or 10 years ago that would have been more difficult? Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we have some legacy systems, as a result of different acquisitions,
Mm.
which are not yet cloud based, and that has been a challenge. But because of remote logins and stuff, it's challenging. But thankfully, it's a small piece of the pie at the moment. But the cloud based element of the business has made a huge difference in terms of
Yeah.
accessibility and flexibility
And if you were
to the
putting
platform.
your sort of leadership hat on, and maybe sort of from a general perspective, and then as Rob, with your sort of day-to-day role, what do you think will change after this? Whether it's 3 or 4 months from now, a lot of people hadn't had access to remote working. Our team was certainly included in that. And, happy to share my view. But what would you
Mm.
see as being the sort of the norm down the line? Do you think remote working become more commonplace, or what do you expect? Maybe a lot of people never want to work from home ever again. So,
Yeah, I imagine that's quite a strong feeling at
mm,
the moment. I think the change will be more gradual than we think. We're all creatures of habit, and most have grown up in an office space, and that's what we're familiar with, even though we've gone
yeah,
through a dramatic change. But I think the biggest change we're going to see over the next couple of years, because the exit from this crisis is not immediate. It's going to be a drip feed back to normalcy, and it will entirely depend on access to a vaccine, which still sounds like it's 12 to 24 months away in reality. Um, I think it'll be the impact of having the ability to have one or two team members join remotely, or in particular, external meetings to be conducted by VC as opposed to having someone come to the office. In terms of productivity, going to a client's office or a supplier's office takes a lot of time. But I think the paradox of working from home is we're all incredibly more accessible, and we can have back-to-back meetings because
mm,
we just have to join the next call, and that productivity increase can be replicated in it when we return to offices. If we're meeting the bank, but the bank is online, and we can have an
yeah,
online conversation, which never really would have been fathomable before. And I think that's going to be the biggest and best change we're going to get out of that, is people will be more accessible online, particularly external
yeah,
people
yeah.
to your business.
And I think just from our own side, like we've managed to probably in the last 2 or 3 weeks, say probably half a dozen people have been onboarded remotely in permanent positions, and yeah, and that we
Nice.
would have foreseen that as being you know, wondering as to what the outcome would be. And in other cases, some people have been just
Mm,
continuously, their start dates being pushed out, and that's it's understandable as well. But the early experience for the remote onboarding is that companies have to be very well organized, and people have to show up. If you've got a
yeah.
10 a.m. Zoom call arranged and 11 o'clock Zoom call arranged, people will show up for that, and it tends to be quite structured. And I think probably a lot of companies maybe they don't feel pressure to have like every hour of every day fulfilled. A lot of the cloud-based software has good tutorials, and then it's trying to sort of link that back in, and and hopefully
Mm.
in most cases there'd be sort of bespoke stuff set up as well now. But yeah, I mean it's definitely from that side of things. I think it's amazing as to how quickly people and companies can adapt to circumstances that would have been unforeseen in the past.
I Totally. I think there's another element to this though that businesses will need to remember is that this
Hmm.
will cost money when we start
Yeah.
our businesses back up. It's very easy to have a five people
Hmm.
individually join a call, but there's actually a hardware element on the other side. If you have four people in a room versus one person joining, you have to create the right environment for those four people to engage, productively in a video call, and that costs money to install in a meeting space. And that's something that businesses, in order to really get the benefits of what we're doing today, will have to invest in
Yeah.
to reap
Very
them
good.
afterwards. And I hope
Yeah.
that people remember that, and don't
Yeah,
don't
totally.
not invest.
And I mean, you touched upon it, and I know sort of half in jest on the personal side, but I mean, there is like, so psychologically, and there's obviously such a focus on mental health. And to me, to a degree, basically, when you're in your office, you're in your office. And when you're at home, there is a sense of being able to close the door from a family perspective and everything else you've got going on. I mean, you're always contactable, and we have been for years with mobile phones and emails to that degree. But I guess maybe it's having the sort of the line. I think maybe people who've got a lot of experience of working remotely always had it, but just a lot of families, they're not set up for it. They don't have the right setup. Could be screaming kids and stuff in the background. And I think it'll be there'll be some people, and certainly our own team included, who are really they really enjoy the office. Well, that's what they tell me anyway. But they enjoy going to work every day and the crack, and being in town and being able to get out and have cups of coffee and all of the everything that goes with that. So just in relation to the space you're in, obviously, which I have to say, when you first got chatting to EML, if it's okay to say it, obviously introduced you a few years back. It was one of the quicker processes I can remember. I never want to say love at first sight in relation to an individual and a company, but it certainly moved on. And it looks to me to be, and maybe you would have been the same with any sector, any company, but you seem to have jumped in with both feet, and you're very passionate about the sector. I really enjoyed the presentation you gave at the recent Finance Leadership Summit. Well, maybe tell me about. So we step away from COVID-19, but so for you stepping into that space, you stepped into quite a senior position within the organization. It's obviously a global company. Do you want to maybe tell me a little bit about EML, and then your sort of induction into the space, and maybe the day job at the moment? It'd be good to hear about.
Yeah, so EML is a B2B business, and we white label nearly everything we do. So um, millions of people use our products every day, and they don't know. So we provide a huge amount of gift cards globally. Certainly, in the Irish space, we work with the likes of Dundrum, huge amounts of retail outlets across Europe, the likes of Pandora, and numerous other ones. So, every time you pick up one of those cards, we're in the T's and C's, and we're the ones who provide the infrastructure in the background to enable a gift card and the right experience for a consumer. We also work with other types of products in the prepaid space. So we work with the likes of, or we have a product in the Irish market called Perks, PE or X, which takes advantage of small benefits. You can gift an employee up to €500 annually with no tax, and we provide that, on the technology that we have, which is on the Mastercard network, which means the card can be used anywhere, including online. And then, kind of the newest technology we're releasing at the moment, which we're trying to get in to market very quick at the moment, given the current environment, is the ability to text someone directly to their mobile phone a debit card, which they can immediately put into their Apple or Google Wallet and use to tap to pay. So it's an incredibly powerful disbursement method that we're working with governments to roll out across the globe, across Europe, America, and the US, or Australia, excuse me, because it's a really quick way for governments to get money into individuals' hands who need it. So that's the stuff we're working on at the moment, which is quite powerful. Um, in terms of my journey, to say it was a steep learning curve would be an understatement. I thought debit cards and credit quite straightforward. You go, you spend it, and you get what you get. In fact, the layers that sit underneath that are multifaceted and incredibly complex, but incredibly enjoyable at the same time to learn it and start to get to grips with it. The number of different players in the space is incredibly immense, and we're just one of them that work at one level in the entire ecosystem. Um, but it's kind of one of those things where you jump in with 2 feet, and you learn as much as you can, as quick as you can. Um, and you make plenty of mistakes and you learn the hard way a lot of times, and you ask loads of stupid questions. Um, and you just keep going and you keep going, and it's amazing the knowledge you can accumulate in 6 to 12 months in a new space. And that's, I think, for me personally, that's one of the most enjoyable things about entering a new space is the knowledge gap that you have, and being comfortable with that knowledge gap, knowing you will close it.
Mm.
You just got to work on it, and figuring out how it all slots together is
Yeah, of
is
course.
incredibly
And
enjoyable.
what I mean, just from considerations or advice, maybe for people who would have been were in that situation now. So the qualified accountants maybe have got some industry experience, and obviously the market's a little bit quiet at the moment, but the expectation is that things will pick back up again. What sort of thought process did you have at the time when you were keeping an eye out on new opportunities? And in terms of qualifying the right position, was it sort of people focused? Was it the sector, Rob? Or what to you was most important when when you were making those decisions?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about finding the right fit and the right type of opportunity. I really don't believe there's a point in taking a job for just the sake of taking a job unless you have to. If you have the ability and luxury to wait and pick the right moment, it's incredibly important that you find the role that's interesting to you. You find the right people, because they're incredibly influential on the career and your trajectory in any job, and that you enjoy working with them. And you can figure that out from background research, from the interviews, and talking to different people. So for me, it's about finding the next step that keeps you moving in the right direction broadly. You don't want to go down a road and just take a junction because you
Hmm.
have to take a junction. You want to make sure you take the turn that is keeping you generally heading in the right direction for your career, because that's incredibly important. Your career is a journey. It's not, a one stop shop each time. You have to understand where you're
Hmm.
broadly heading, and the role and the people and the knowledge you'll gain and in that journey, has to
Yeah.
constantly build. So, I try to take all of that in when I'm
Yeah.
making a
And
decision like
just
that.
from a leadership perspective, then, I mean, do, is there any particular part of your career whereby you look back and you felt, look, that's someone I aspired to, or was there sort of formal leadership training that you would have pursued, or, maybe what were the touch points that maybe would have inspired you and maybe have shaped your approach at the moment?
Um, I think during my time in KPMG, and all of the professional services firms, you get held to an incredibly high standard, and you're exposed
Hmm.
to very senior people from the start. So that's an incredible experience, because it gives you the sense of purpose to go, well, I have to deliver this to the right standard, because it's going to be seen by the people who need to make decisions based on the work that you do, even if it's only a small piece of that pie. But everything plays a part. So getting that understanding and that exposure, I think, was an incredibly important part of my early career. Then when I joined the technology company, Property Button, in the tech space, or the property technology space, that was on the
Hmm.
other end of the spectrum, where it was a very small young business, trying to grow, and it's it's very fluid, it's very responsive, it's very quick, which presents a whole set of other challenges which you will learn to respond to. But you certainly take the experience you have of the structure and the expectations and the deliverables from early in your training career, and you put those into force in a business that's trying to grow and trying to become structured and more mature. And for me, I was fortunate to have that experience in KPMG, and then in a young growing startup, and be
Hmm.
able to marry those two, and then use those two separate skill sets, I guess, that I learned, and now employ those
Yeah,
in
very good.
EML.
And I mean, leading or looking back from where you are now in terms of from a training perspective, because there's to some degree when people finish audit, people look back and say, well, that was a great experience to get, and they work in very interesting companies, but it sometimes, soon after they get the results and they're really looking to get away from audit to step, into industry. You obviously decided on the transaction services route at the time, which I'd imagine, it would have been a very interesting space to be in. But maybe looking back at audit, looking back at transaction services, what experience maybe away from the leadership side? So maybe whether it's from a technical perspective, from a commercial perspective, Rob, what do you feel has added most to your day job at the moment, or what do you remember most from that period of time?
Um, I think for me, really, it was interesting to see the breadth of business that we saw in the transactions. So, firstly, I got to see a, a very various number of different businesses and what was interesting about them. So that helped me narrow my focus down into
Hmm.
where I wanted to go in my career. But really, what I found interesting was, you'd always start with a couple of initial meetings with senior management to understand the business and the transaction and the rationale, and you got to see part of the bigger picture. And then you got to see it again at the end when you were presenting your report. Often the bit in between is the tough solitary
Hmm.
work by yourself or with your team in the office. But at either end, you got an experience of, okay, this is the business, its reason, what it's doing, this is how it's run, and why management are like that. And you got to see a lot of different types of characters and how they ran a business, and judge for yourself if, well, that business looks really successful, and you know is it because of how it's run or is it because of the market? And you got to see all of that. And I think, seeing those traits from different people,
Hmm.
and how businesses responded and were run and how transactions were completed was incredibly influential for me to understand, well, how would I like to behave and how would I like to run my team and operate within my business? And I think that's been
Yeah,
incredibly
very
powerful
good.
for me.
And looking at the sector you're in at the moment, because it would appear, to be going in one direction. There's a lot more, and the Irish fintech space seems to be quite exciting. And I know there's all sort of shapes and sizes in terms of different companies. You mentioned that a lot of your stuff maybe is in the prepaid card space, and then you have other sort of various platforms. But what do you foresee maybe, the future of the sector? Is Ireland going to continue to be a hotspot, maybe in the same way technology in Ireland has been very strong? And how do you see it change? And I know this is sort of a big question, but I mean, the model of retail banks globally is there does appear to be a lot of change going on, and retail banks employ a lot of people very often. And I think this is the same globally. People join a bank in their 20s, they very often stay, historically have stayed till they've retired. And I think the fintech market is certainly changing that. So it's obviously a big question, but if you were to outline your predictions maybe for 2020, 2021 as to what we should expect.
Well, I'll put some huge caveats around everything I'm about to say because we don't know and nobody
Yeah.
expected COVID-19 to say the least. Um, for banks, I think, banks for the moment will continue to exist. There's no doubt about that. They play a hugely important part in our ecosystem. And we're seeing that in the
Mm,
day-to-day stuff that they're doing at the moment with supporting businesses and short-term, small value loans to keep small businesses afloat. And I think in the UK and US, they're being used to roll out some government stimulus packages. And that's incredibly important. I think the challenge they have, further down the track is their technology development, the legacy systems that they hold, and the expectation of the consumer changing. And I think what we're probably not thinking about at the moment, but what probably is happening subconsciously is people's access to
mm.
banking right now. No one can go to a bank branch really, and they can if they have to, but we're more and more at home considering, well, why can't I do that online? Why can't I do that on my phone with a traditional bank? And where people have the likes of a Monzo, a Starling, a Revolut, um, a lot of those functions are very accessible. It's very straightforward and quicker and cheaper. I think that's the challenge down the road in terms of day-to-day banking, accessibility, and customer retention. What's going to happen to the banks there? And I think the neobanks still have a number of steps to go to be a proper day-to-day banking platform that we can all use. Like they have limitations today, but there's no reason those limitations can't be significantly reduced in the years ahead. And it's up to the banks in that time frame to figure out how they remain relevant to particularly the younger
Yeah, very good,
generations.
very good. And I mean, in relation to sort of talent in Ireland, well, I guess two questions. I'm going to ask about sort of talent and the ability to attract the right people for the what's required. I think you guys have a big technology setup in Galway. I'm right in saying you guys hire people in that
Yeah.
space.
Yes.
Has that been a barrier to development in terms of getting the technology talent, Rob, or has Galway been a good hub for you on that front?
I think always actually a great hub for talent. And I don't, to be honest, we don't require talent to be in Galway
Mm,
to hire into our tech team. we're very happy to take, if we find some good talent, particularly on the tech side, and that's always been the way over the last few years. There's been far more flexibility in terms of working remotely on the tech side, to work with people remotely.
And the next piece is just on the sort of regulation compliance side. I know it's an area that you and I have discussed. I mean, how is that something basically at sort of the forefront of the prepaid side, or is it more in relation to? So maybe if you want to fill us in as to what the lay of the land at the moment is. I know PSD2 is obviously, is regularly mentioned in recent years. Well, what's your view on that front in terms of the expectation?
In terms of the expectation, I suppose I certainly am the expert in regulation, but I think for us it's about having the right talent in the right places for regulation, because it is extremely complex and it's constantly changing with, SCA, PSD2, as you've mentioned, different types of regulations coming from different places. GDPR plays a part in all of that as well. And we've been fortunate; we've had some really strong hires recently, which have really bolstered our risk and compliance teams. But in terms of managing that on a day-to-day basis, it literally is a job in itself, and it's complex. We have e-money license under the central bank here. In fact, the business we acquired, Perfect Card, was the first one to ever have one in Ireland. The second being Facebook. For many years, it was just the two of us, and now I think there could be well over 10 or 12 licenses in Ireland, with a lot of players coming to get one following Brexit. And entering and setting up offices here, which, you might think, oh, competition, oh no, but from our side, actually, it's great because it brings a huge amount of talent into the space. It's a very niche role to fill in terms of compliance and regulation relating to the central bank, and particularly the e-money licenses and regulations. So having more players in that space in Ireland attracts more talented individuals, which makes it, a far better ecosystem for us all to
very good. And so I probably could have asked the question better. I guess was more in relation to the barriers for entry from a compliance perspective. But I think you've sort of answered that now. But it does, I mean, like a lot of, the central bank across insurance, across retail banking, across alternative lenders, it has such an impact on a day-to-day basis, and it's interesting because I think if you look at, say, some of the fintech companies, they're very much, they hire a lot of good technology people, and they're obviously providing, various services and stuff now. But it would appear that the demand for, compliance and regulation professionals, will continue to be on the up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's the kind of thing you have to stay ahead of. You don't want a problem, and if you have a problem, it's too late.
And just, I mean, speaking of regulation, and just to sort of put it out there, I mean, how do you feel? I mean, the Irish government are generally seem to be coming through this in a positive sense, but just on the ground in relation to, from a government support perspective, is it too early to say as to how well or badly maybe the Irish government has handled it? Obviously, EML is an Australian parent. What any major differences you've observed?
We're obviously looking at government mechanisms across Europe, across Australia and the US, and they've varied dramatically, I guess, in terms of how they're operating and what incentives they're rolling out. Broadly, the Irish system is generally aligned to the UK system, which is better for us because it ensures consistent kind of approach. I think, my own personal views of the Irish government's kind of reaction to the crisis is actually really positive. I think they've rolled out dramatic measures quickly. They're not perfect, but they're out there and they're supporting people, which is the most important thing. I think earlier today we saw Paschal Donoghue, revise the benefit, the wage subsidy scheme for lower earners from 70% subsidy to I think 85%, in recognition of the challenges it presented against the COVID unemployment benefit. And that's the right thing to do. And I'd rather see the government roll out initiatives which are imperfect and then make them better than waiting for them to be perfect. And because it's too late then. we've got to act, we've got to act quickly, and then plug
Yeah.
the gaps afterwards. So I've
Yeah,
been
very good,
impressed.
very good, cool. Well, Rob, you've been very, very good with your time. What I'd love to do is to get you back on again. Hopefully when we're through all this and everyone's spending lots of money. Let's hope that by Christmas those
Yeah.
Dundrum gift cards are back. As big currency. And anything we've missed today? Anything else you wanted to chat about before we wrap up?
No, I think it's been a really enjoyable conversation. Next time, hopefully, we
Yeah,
can
good
actually
man.
do it in
Okay,
person.
cheers, Rob. Thanks a mil.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Mel. Bye bye.